We're in John chapter 13. John chapter 13. This whole series has been going through John and has been trying to emphasize just this idea of God with us. Uh, that, you guys remember back Christmas story. You remember that when an angel appeared to Mary and told her that, hey, you're about to be pregnant with, God, and he's going to be the Savior that the whole world's been waiting for. She was given very specific instructions. Name him Jesus, and this name means Emmanuel, which means God with us. And it wasn't just a friendly reminder that, hey, God's with you. It was God is coming here to walk on this dirt, to live in this house, to be raised up. You're going to have to change holy diapers, if there is such a thing. Everything. The Bible tells us in the book of Hebrews that, everything we struggled with, he went through too. I think, I strongly suspect, I can't, find a Bible verse to say this, so just my opinion, but I strongly believe that if you could walk up to Jesus and ask him what the hardest part of his time here on earth was, not just like a single event, but like what was the hardest thing in life, I think he would probably say the people. And I've said before that, ministry would be great if it weren't for the people. You guys make this hard sometimes. Well, and I know, yeah, that's what I was about to say. I know I make it hard for you guys sometimes. Tanya and my kids, at the very least, and my dad too now, they can all vouch if you go and ask them, I make life hard. Amen. You didn't have to answer that fast. Okay, you could have said, yeah, you're right, Dad, something like that, just a little more hesitation, a little less enthusiasm would be good. You're right, Ross, there you go. Thank you, that is better. Thank you. This is why she's a semi-adopted daughter. Okay. Okay. We're hitting this chapter, and this chapter is, I think, a hard one for Jesus. Not to say that obviously the suffering he went through on the steps to the cross wasn't hard, because it was. It would have broken me 100 times over, I'm sure. But I strongly suspect that what we see kind of coming around in this chapter is emotionally probably the hardest stuff. Because what we see here is we see in this chapter, we're going to be covering basically Judas leaving Jesus to go betray it. And knowing that, and make no mistake, Jesus knew from the beginning, when he asked Judas to come follow him, he knew what he was getting into. And I like to think that back when God called us to start up this church, that we knew to some degree, as much as humanly possible anyway, what we were getting into. We knew that there were going to be wounds like what we got this week. And it's wounds like that. They come from people. And it's not unique to the ministry, because I bet you money, every single one of you can think about somebody who has hurt you deeply. Maybe you're sitting in the same row as the person. I don't know. But it's not something that's unique to the human experience. It's part of what Jesus went through to show that he understood what we go through. Because we do get hurt by people. We get betrayed out and out, just complete betrayal, like what Judas does. And we're also going to see in this chapter that Jesus knew what was coming with Peter. Now, if you know Peter's story, you know that after Jesus died and rose again, and after the Spirit came down at Pentecost, he became a whole different person. He took his foot out of his mouth and he started living for Christ. And he spoke some bold sermons and stood up to powerful people who could have him killed or jailed or whatever. And he was a revolutionary figure. But, you know, Peter got Jesus down. During this process of crucifixion, when Jesus is suffering, his people, his disciples, wanted to be as close to him as they could. Peter was one of those. And he ended up, just so that he could stay close and just so that he could see what was going on. I mean, Peter's there literally in the midst of the mob that's crucifying Jesus. And Peter, 3 times was asked, aren't you one of his disciples? And each time Peter lied through his teeth and said no. And I can't believe that Jesus didn't feel that. That yes, Peter came back and you know Jesus forgave him, and Peter became a man who was on fire for God. But at that point in time, that had to be like a knife twisting. Jesus felt it. I'm very sure of that. It wasn't just a simple set of words to say when Jesus told Peter, I forgive you. There was a wound there. And this chapter is all about how Jesus, knowing these things would happen, how he treated them, how deeply he loved them. And when God told me back in the beginning to get started on the book of John, for going through it in message series like this, basically he put on my heart not to rush through things. And so we're covering all of 2 verses today. Because there's so much meat in here. There's so much good stuff. And it's powerful things that if we look at and we wrap our lives around these truths like God wants us to, then we're going to come out a lot better for it. Let's go ahead and read these. So John 13, verses 1 and 2. It says, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to the Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. It's a short passage, but it's got a lot in it. So let's just take it and let's break in. So the first thing is just kind of setting the scene. So this is after 3.5 years that Jesus has been walking around with these guys, okay? 3.5 years. And if you've spent 3.5 years literally walking around, working with, and living with a set of people, you get close. And that's just what it is. These guys had so many inside jokes, I'm sure. They laughed, they cried, they, suffered under the hot sun, and they were, cold together, trying to find some way to stay warm, each huddling closer to the fire. It's like, hey, it's winter, but, and you stink, but I still want you close. Just moments like that, and just everything along the way, all the things that you guys can imagine that happens from bonding with people for 3.5 years. I'm sure in some form or fashion it happened. And that was the who. Now, this idea of Passover, if you don't know, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on it. This is from the book of Exodus, okay? This is actually what we were watching last night in that movie, Prince of Egypt. It's all about the fact that God had allowed his people to become slaves in Egypt. And they were treated badly, very badly. And it was because literally the Egyptian Pharaoh was trying as hard as he could to kill off the Israeli people. He's like, there's way too many of these people. I think there's more of them than there is of us. We got the power though, so we're going to work them so hard. We're going to literally try to work them to death. That's what we're talking about. Now, I know here in America we've had slaves and we've had some um, bad masters who treated us badly. But simply put, there was always that simple, basic concept of I paid money for this person. I need them to do work. And so you may treat them badly, but you want them to live, right? That was the basic concept. Pharaoh had no such idea in his head. He's like, we're working these guys to death. And that wasn't working well enough, so he decided to go ahead and have all the male children killed. Basically, as they were being born, he was trying to have them killed, murdered. And so part of what happened, oh, no, let me change that, change the way I'm saying that. And so Moses, basically, long story short, was brought in by God, commissioned by God, to go and be the one to tell the Pharaoh to let people go. And Pharaoh refused. He was a stubborn soul. And if you read the things that Egypt went through, I think probably if it had been me, I don't think I would have gotten past the frogs coming out. Just frogs everywhere. Well, thank you. I mean, there's only so many frog legs you can eat, right? Um, but ultimately, what made Pharaoh decide to let people go was that the final plague that hit Egypt was that God said, I'm going to kill every firstborn child. For all you who are the eldest in your family, this was done for you. But he made an exception. He said, I want you guys to go find a lamb, kill it, you're going to eat it, and there's more stuff to it. But I want you to basically take some of the blood, I want you to smear it on the doorposts. So that way, when God sent an angel of death to Egypt to kill all the firstborn children, any home that had that painted on there, there was no risk. Angel literally passed over that house to go find another one and go get it. And all the people of Israel did that. Every single one of those plagues, by the way, that went before, everything, right down from to the frogs, the people of Israel didn't suffer from those at all. I mean, I remember the one that struck me most profoundly was the Bible talks about how darkness fell over the land of Egypt, and it was a darkness so deep it could be felt. I'm like, I've never been in something that dark. But it was shining over a place that the Israeli people lived. That was fine. It's just this profound thing. And so Passover is a celebration that God instituted to celebrate his deliverance of his people. He set them free. And so every year they came together, they killed a lamb, they ate a meal together, and this is what it was. That's the Passover. So we talked about who, now we've talked about what, or maybe the when. That might be a better way to put it. So when it says before the Passover celebration, that tells you what it is. This is coming up on immediately this week. Okay. Jesus knew his hour had come to leave this world and return to the Father. Now, right there's another thing. I've said this part before, and I'm going to say it again. Generally speaking, I don't have a big problem with what God tells me to do. There have been exceptions to that. Don't get me wrong. But generally, I'm like, that's a good idea, God. Let's do it. But the problem I have is his timing. Just being honest, my personal opinion, God's timing generally stinks. On the front end. Afterwards, I can look back. I can say, okay, yeah, I see your point. You were right. I was wrong. But coming into it, I'm like, no, God, it needs to happen when I think it needs to happen. And he's just like, and, he does the same. And he does it when he wants to do it. And Jesus, his life was no different. There's a time that his mother, that started his ministry, very start of his ministry. He's at a wedding, Cana, and his mother is there too, and they've run out of wine. And Mary says, hint, 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 nudge, nudge, can you do something about this? They're about to be humiliated in front of the whole town. Can you fix this problem they have? And Jesus' response was, my hour has not yet come. He understood the timing. Back at the wedding was not the right time for him to, well, now we're at that time. He recognized that the hour has come. And that's, like I said, this is one of the big struggles that I think, and I don't think I'm unique in this. I don't think I'm the only one. I'll bet you guys have struggled with God's timing too. But I'm here to tell you again, on the other side of it, not on the front, but on the back side of it, man, it's perfect. My ego hates to admit that. It shouldn't, because it's God we're talking about, but I'm being honest. Okay? It's perfect. And there's times that I got it, I look back and I'm like, I don't understand why it happened then. I don't understand why it had to happen then. I don't see the difference between what he said when it happened and when I thought it should happen. And I may never understand on the side of it. But I'd like to think that sometime when we're all gathered together in paradise, that God's going to set aside some time with me, and we're going to get to go through a series of questions that I have for him. Why did you wait until this time to do that? It's probably going to be the most common one. But regardless, from the times that I can see why, I realize it's perfect. And that's a hard pill to swallow. If we're being honest, it just is. We don't, let's face it, there are some of us in this room, I'm not going to look at them, who are control freaks. Okay, I said it. And people who are control freaks like to have every aspect of life that they can possibly manage managed. Okay, it's got to be my way. It's got to be there's. But if we're being honest, that's all of us on some level. I mean, some of us are let's just say, better at it than others. But I mean, it's all of us. We all try to figure out how to control as much as we can of our environment. And that environment includes what's happening and who's in that environment. And so we get our own little agenda going. And we got 100 different little dysfunctional ways to try to control our environment and the people in it. And the simple fact is, what I've learned is that control is an illusion. It's a little deception that we latch onto and we look really hard at, and we just think, okay, I've got it, I've got control. But the only thing we've got is a lie. And so the sooner we can let go of this idea that things need to happen in our timing, the better off we're going to be. The better off, the closer we're going to get to Jesus. Because one of the things I've found is that when I have those little disagreements about God or with God about timing of something, it puts a little bit of a wedge between us. I'm still on board with the what usually, like I said, but sometimes, often the when still puts this little wedge between you and I. And there's a disagreement. Let me think about it. How often, when you got somebody you live with, someone you're close to, and you have a disagreement, I mean, maybe you're sitting around laughing at the table or whatever, and things are going great, and then suddenly this disagreement happens. If nothing else, it kind of kills the mood. There's that little wedge. It may not be a big deal, but it's there. It happens to all of us. So basically, what Jesus is showing us here, when it says that he knew his hour had come to leave this world and return to the Father, Jesus is practicing radical acceptance of the Father's will. Because again, remember what it is, the hour signifies. We're talking about crucifixion, death, torture, mocking, all the things that we don't want to experience, he experienced. And it was literally the death of him. And he knows it. And if you remember, if you guys have read the Bible, you know that later on, Jesus goes into the garden and he's praying. And the main thing he prays is, God, Father, if there's another way, let's do it that way. And he knew the answer. But emotionally speaking, that's where he was. He's like, I don't want to do this. This is horrible. Who wants to have a crown of thorns jammed down on their head, have nails hammered down through his hands and his feet? Who wants to have a whip flog you into within an inch of your life, then have to carry this huge piece of lumber up a hill, and then basically just die of slow suffocation while you're bleeding? Ain't nobody wanting anything like that. And Jesus knew that hour had come. And he's practicing radical acceptance. And not only is he saying, okay, guys, I just need a few minutes by myself. Just leave me alone for a little while, and I can get a handle on this, and we can proceed. He's not doing that. He's sitting here, and he's about to engage with these people, with these 12 knuckleheads he's been walking around with for 3.5 years. And he knows that one of them is going to literally betray him to death, and the other one is going to be too scared to admit that he knows it. Goes on and says that he loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loves them to the very end. I don't know if that's the best way to phrase that, is that he loved them to the end. A lot of versions say it something like that. One I think says loved them to the uttermost. But the word being used there is teleos. That's the original Greek word that they use, and that's the oldest manuscripts that we have of the New Testament. They're all written in Greek, and so we translated them into English, and that word is teleos, which means an end, but not like the end of a story. I mean, it means the completion of something. It means that whatever task you're set out to do, you're done. If you're remodeling the house is finished. Whatever it is. And he's saying that his time with them is pretty well done. He's got literally just a matter of hours with them. And he's loved them all the way. Here's the finish line. I'm loving him still. And he doesn't stop and say, guys, I need a minute. let me spend some time with the Father, and you guys leave me alone. There's lots of times during Jesus' ministry you look and you read and you see he just disappeared. He walked away from his disciples. They're like, where the heck is Jesus? I don't know. And he did that to go be with the Father so he can get some alone time with God. It's a good practice to have, by the way. But this was not one of those times. He knew, even when he went to go be with the Father and pray in the garden, he took his disciples with him. He loved them to the end. And oftentimes, speaking personally, when I'm going through something that's hard, man, what I do is I withdraw. I'm an introvert by nature, and so withdrawing and being by myself is what I typically need in order to get my head screwed back on straight. Man, I don't know. I suspect Jesus was right down the middle of introvert, extrovert, being perfect and all. He had the best of both worlds. Um, so he knew when to take time to be alone, and he knew how to draw his energy from people. But he didn't try to get it by himself. He didn't try to say, okay, I can put up with you guys, but I really just need you to not bother me right now, okay? Nothing like that. Nothing like that. He's just here. He's trying to love these guys to the very end. What we see, what happens next in chapter 13 is what you basically see a picture of this. It's Jesus' love is so complete, so amazing, so unconditional that Judas Iscariot is one of the people whose feet he washed. So is Peter, the man who was too scared to admit that he knew him. And the rest of them who were too scared to even get close to the crowd. Well, as far as I can think of anyway, I can only think of Peter and John. I can't think of anybody else who was around at the crucifixion that we have an account of. Maybe I'm wrong. I didn't go looking. But that's all I can think of, is that Peter and John, I think, were the only ones there. But they were all about to fail him one way or another. And Jesus is about to take the time to do the humblest form of serving that we know that culture had. That's the love he had for these guys. Jesus didn't come to be a great leader. He came to serve and to love. If that's not a challenge for you, then I need you to come spend some time with me and help me out here. Uh, because when I know the bank's about to hit the fan, man, I'm taking my time. I'm doing what I can to prepare myself. It's like all I got strength for is to worry about myself, try to get myself through this in an adequate manner when I know it's about to happen. That wasn't Jesus. He's like, I need to help prepare these guys, not only for what's about to hit the fan, but I need to prepare them for the years afterwards. And the idea of being a servant is so integral to what the church is about. So, question comes, can you step up and can you serve even when it's about to hit the fan? Or maybe in the middle of it hitting the fan? Can we step up and love people so unconditionally that even when the person who's hurting us is right there and we're in the middle of it, can we find a way to love that person right there, right then? Jesus did it. He didn't do it simply because he was God. Yes, he was perfect, but you know what? He came to show us that it can be done. And I promise you, it can be done. So the next time some hard time comes, and usually our hard times, if we're being honest, it's people. People are our biggest hard times. Whether it's the boss who said something, did something, or the spouse who said just something or did something, or the kids, or a friend, or whatever. You know, most of our problems come from people. I mean, it's not just ministry that'd be easy for if it weren't for people. It's church that would be easy if it weren't for the people. It's work that would be easy if it weren't for the people. It's all of it. Again, my experiences are not unique to me. You guys know what I'm going through. Maybe your situations look a little different than mine, but that's because I'm not you and you're not me. That's the same basic problem. Jesus is going through the same basic problem. He's been walking around with 12 people who, to say they're imperfect, is an understatement. You look at these guys, most of the time they got it wrong. When Jesus taught, these were the guys going, Jesus, about what you said, I got one question. Huh? They didn't get it most of the time. Jesus said, come back and explain. Most of the time. And these guys that were closest to him, you think if anyone got it, they'd be the ones to get it. They didn't. And after 3.5 years of frustrations and laughs and tears and everything else, he's still there at the worst time in his life, serving them. We need to be ready, willing, and able to do the same. So I'll bet you money. Right now, you can think about somebody. Maybe they're a complete Judas, and they've betrayed you on the deepest level that you know to be betrayed. Maybe it's a little lighter. It's something like what Peter did. They just, they were too embarrassed to speak up for you when people were talking bad about you. Whatever it is, I'll bet you money. I'll bet you money you can think about somebody who's betrayed you in some way or another. And I just want to take a little time here. And I'm going to do a song. I just started. I need to back up the computer. Vanish back into the corner. I'm going to do a song. And you can sing it if you want to. You can sit there and pray. Um, I can tell you that, Evie is here to pray for you if you need someone. I'm gonna put him on the spot, but David, if you're more comfortable with the guy, David's a great guy to go grab, and he would be happy to pray with you. Um, but whoever, if you want to grab the person next to you, if you want to do it by yourself, that's fine, whatever. But this is not the sort of thing I want you to just let slide by. Because when Jesus went to the cross, he went for Judas and for Peter and for anyone else, all those high priests, all those Roman soldiers, he went to the cross for them too. For every single person who would betray him. And he came and he did it all just in the spirit of wanting to forgive us. Who do you need to forgive? Who do you need to come in and serve? Who do you need to love to the very end, even though they don't deserve it? Even though they've abused your love in some way or another.